The marketplace buzzed with activity as Captain Jake Morrison adjusted the straps of his worn leather jacket. Earth had been part of the Galactic Federation for 3 years now, but he still felt like an outsider on Zephyria Prime. The alien vendors with their crystalline skin and multiple arms moved with fluid grace between stalls selling exotic fruits that glowed like lanterns and technological devices that hummed with unknown energy. Jake wasn't here for trade goods, though. His battered cargo ship, the Lucky Strike, sat in the docking bay with a busted hyperdrive core. The repair cost would drain his savings, but without it, he'd be stranded on this planet for months. As one of the few independent human traders operating in this sector, he couldn't afford that kind of delay. Human trader, called a melodic voice behind him. Jake turned to see a Zephyrian merchant with deep purple skin and golden eyes. "You seek hyperdrive components, yes? I have what you need, but the price..." The alien's 3 arms gestured expressively. Before Jake could respond, chaos erupted in the square. Royal guards in gleaming armor poured from every entrance, their energy weapons crackling with deadly light. The crowd of aliens immediately dropped to their knees, pressing their faces to the polished stone ground. Jake stood confused until the merchant grabbed his arm with surprising strength. "Kneel, fool human. The royal family approaches." Jake dropped reluctantly, his human pride bristling at the forced submission. Through the gaps between kneeling bodies, he watched an elaborate procession enter the marketplace. Floating platforms carried figures draped in shimmering robes that seemed to bend light around them. Guards marched in perfect formation, their footsteps echoing like thunder in the suddenly silent square. At the center of the procession, a massive platform held the most imposing alien Jake had ever seen. Emperor Volthek stood nearly 12 feet tall, his midnight black skin marked with silver patterns that pulsed with bioluminescent light. Forearms ending in razor-sharp talons crossed over his broad chest, while his 6 eyes scanned the crowd with predatory intelligence. A crown of crystallized starlight rested on his elongated skull, and his presence radiated power that made Jake's skin crawl. Beside the Emperor stood a being that could only be his wife, Empress Nethra. She was equally tall, but more slender, her dark blue skin covered in intricate tattoos that moved like living things. Her 4 arms held different ceremonial objects, and her multiple eyes glowed with an inner fire that spoke of both wisdom and terrible strength. But it was the small figure between them that caught Jake's attention. Princess Zara couldn't have been more than 7 years old by human standards, though Jake knew alien aging worked differently. She stood barely 3 feet tall, her skin a lighter purple than her mother's, marked with the same silver patterns as her father, but dim and delicate. Unlike her parents' multiple limbs, she had only 2 arms, which Jake had heard was considered a defect among the royal bloodline. Her large, dark eyes held an intelligence far beyond her apparent years. The princess wore a miniature version of the royal robes, but instead of the commanding presence her parents projected, she seemed almost fragile. Her small hands clutched a strange device that looked like a crystalline flower, and her gaze wandered over the kneeling crowd with what Jake could only describe as loneliness. Emperor Volthek's voice boomed across the marketplace, speaking in the formal Zephyrian tongue. Jake's universal translator struggled with the complex grammar, but he caught the general meaning. Something about trade agreements and the glory of the empire. Standard royal proclamation stuff. As the emperor spoke, Jake noticed the princess had wandered slightly away from her parents, her curious eyes taking in everything around her. She moved with the careful grace of someone used to being watched constantly, but Jake could see the child's natural curiosity fighting against royal protocol. That's when their eyes met. Jake had been kneeling behind a fruit vendor's stall, partially hidden by hanging displays of bioluminescent produce. The princess's gaze swept over the crowd and suddenly stopped, focusing directly on him. For a moment that felt like hours, they stared at each other across the vast cultural divide that separated them. The princess tilted her head slightly, and Jake saw something flicker in her dark eyes. Recognition? Interest? He couldn't tell. But she took a small step in his direction, her small face scrunched in concentration as if trying to remember something important. Jake felt a chill run down his spine. There was something about the way she looked at him, something that suggested this wasn't just idle curiosity. The princess's grip tightened on her crystalline device, and the patterns on her skin began to glow brighter, pulsing in rhythm with her quickened heartbeat. The royal guards hadn't noticed yet. Their attention focused outward on potential threats from the crowd. The emperor and empress continued their ceremonial duties, unaware that their daughter had become fixated on a lone human trader hiding behind alien fruit. Jake wanted to look away, to break the strange connection he felt building between them, but something held his gaze. The princess's eyes were wide now, and her small mouth had fallen open as if in shock. She raised one tiny hand and pointed directly at him, though the gesture was so small that only Jake could see it. The marketplace around them continued its frozen tableau. Hundreds of aliens remained kneeling in perfect silence while their rulers spoke of trade and prosperity. The guard maintained their vigilant watch for external threats. The merchants waited patiently for the royal family to complete their business and leave. But in that small bubble of awareness between a human trader and an alien princess, something momentous was building. Jake could feel in his bones, a sense that his ordinary life was about to change in ways he couldn't imagine. The princess's silver patterns were glowing brighter now, visible even through her ceremonial robes, and her dark eyes held an intensity that seemed far too old for her apparent age. Whatever was about to happen, Jake knew with absolute certainty that nothing would ever be the same again. The princess took another small step toward him, her crystalline device beginning to emit a soft, musical chime that only Jake seemed to hear. The marketplace held its breath, suspended between the ordinary world of commerce and politics, and something far more extraordinary that was about to unfold between the stars. Princess Zara's small voice cut through the ceremonial speeches like a blade through silk. The words she spoke were in perfect standard galactic, clear, and unmistakable despite her youth. Every being in the marketplace heard them, from the lowliest merchant to the highest royal guard. "Mom, that's him." The effect was instantaneous and electric. Emperor Voltheck's booming voice stopped mid-sentence, the ancient words of ceremony dying in his throat. Empress Nethra's glowing tattoos flared bright blue as she spun toward her daughter with inhuman speed. Every guard in the square pivoted in perfect synchronization, their weapons charging with deadly energy as they sought the threat their princess had identified. The silence that followed was so complete that Jake could hear his own heartbeat thundering in his ears. Hundreds of aliens remained frozen in their kneeling positions, afraid to move, afraid to breathe. The only sound was the soft hum of charged weapons and the distant whistle of wind through the marketplace's crystalline spires. Princess Zara stood perfectly still, one small arm extended toward Jake's hiding spot behind the fruit vendor's stall. Her dark eyes remained locked on his, and the silver patterns on her skin now blazed like miniature stars. The crystalline device in her other hand sang, with harmonious chimes that seemed to resonate through the very air. Jake felt every eye in the marketplace turn toward him. The fruit vendor beside him whimpered in terror, his crystalline skin shifting to a pale, frightened yellow. Other merchants near Jake's position began trembling, their various alien physiologies displaying universal signs of fear. They knew that being near whatever had caught the princess's attention could mean death for them all. Emperor Voltheck took a step forward, his massive frame radiating menace. When he spoke, his voice carried the authority of absolute power, each word precisely enunciated and deadly calm. "Zara, explain. Now." The princess didn't look away from Jake, but her small voice carried clearly across the silent square. "He's the one from my dreams, father. The human who saves our people. The one who brings the light when darkness comes." Jake's blood turned to ice. Dreams? Prophecies? This was rapidly spiraling into territory he wanted no part of. He was just a trader trying to fix his ship and maybe turn a small profit. He wasn't anyone's savior, and he certainly wasn't meant to be involved in whatever cosmic drama the Zephyrian royal family had going on. Empress Nethra moved with liquid grace to her daughter's side, kneeling so their faces were level. Her multiple eyes studied the princess with intense concern, while her living tattoos writhed with patterns Jake didn't recognize. When she spoke, her voice held layers of meaning that the universal translator couldn't fully capture. "Little star, are you certain? The visions can be unclear, especially for one so young. Perhaps it's him, Princess Zara interrupted, her voice gaining strength. I see him every night. The human with kind eyes who stands against the shadow ships. He saves us when the Empire falls. He brings hope when all seems lost. The crystalline device in her hand suddenly projected a holographic image above the crowd. Jake's stomach dropped as he saw himself displayed in shimmering light for everyone to see. It was unmistakably him, down to the scar on his left cheek from a pirate attack 2 years ago. But in the vision, he wore unfamiliar armor and carried weapons he'd never seen, standing before burning ships and screaming aliens in what looked like the aftermath of a terrible battle. The crowd gasped collectively. Several aliens near the front of the square pressed their faces even harder against the ground, as if trying to merge with the stone itself. The royal guards, following their training, immediately began moving to surround Jake's position, their formation precise and deadly. Jake knew he had seconds to act before the situation became irrevocably complicated. Standing slowly, he raised his hands in what he hoped was a universal gesture of non-aggression. His movement caused a ripple of tension through the guards, but Princess Zura's gentle smile stopped them from attacking. "Your Majesties," Jake called out, his voice surprisingly steady despite his racing heart. "I think there's been some kind of mistake. I'm just a trader. I fix ships and haul cargo between systems. I'm not anyone's prophetic savior." Emperor Volthek studied Jake with the intensity of a predator evaluating prey. His 6 eyes seemed to see everything, from Jake's worn leather jacket to the plasma pistol he carried for protection. After a moment that felt like eternity, the Emperor spoke. "Step forward, human. Let us see this supposed savior my daughter has foreseen." Jake had no choice but to comply. The alternative was being dragged forward by the guards, and that would likely end with him being shot. As he walked through the parted crowd, aliens shrank away from him as if his mere presence might contaminate them. Their fear was palpable, a living thing that seemed to writhe through the marketplace. When Jake reached the edge of the royal platform, Princess Zara clapped her small hands together with delight. The crystalline device she held chimed more loudly, and its holographic display shifted to show different scenes. Jake saw himself in various situations, always recognizable despite the alien contexts. Sometimes he was fighting alongside Zephyrian soldiers, sometimes he was helping refugees, and in one particularly disturbing image, he was standing over the Emperor's fallen body while the palace burned behind him. "The visions are not always clear about sequence or meaning," Princess Zara said, her voice taking on an otherworldly quality that made Jake's skin crawl. "But they're always true. You will be important to our people's survival. Human Jake Morrison." Jake started. He hadn't told anyone his name. The princess giggled at his expression, a sound both innocent and deeply unsettling. "I know many things about you. Your ship is named Lucky Strike. You have a sister on Earth named Maria who worries about you. You carry guilt about something that happened during the Proxima Colony incident. You prefer real coffee to synthesized. Enough." Emperor Volthek's voice cut through his daughter's recitation like a physical blow. "If you are indeed the human from Zara's visions, then you are both a blessing and a curse. The visions show you saving our people, but they also show great destruction and change." Empress Nethera rose from beside her daughter, her tall form casting a shadow over Jake. "The question is whether you cause the destruction or merely arrive in time to witness it. Prophecy is rarely kind in its clarity." Jake looked between the 3 members of the royal family, each representing a different aspect of the impossible situation he'd stumbled into. The Emperor radiated power and barely contained violence, ready to eliminate any threat to his empire. The Empress embodied wisdom and caution, clearly weighing the implications of her daughter's visions. And Princess Zara herself seemed caught between childlike excitement and an ancient knowledge that no child should possess. Around them, the marketplace remained frozen in terrified silence. Jake realized that his next words would determine not just his own fate, but potentially the future of human-Zephyrian relations. The weight of that responsibility settled on his shoulders like a lead blanket. The princess stepped closer to the edge of the platform, bringing herself closer to Jake's eye level. When she spoke again, her voice carried a sadness that seemed far too deep for someone so young. The darkness is coming. Jake Morrison. Sooner than anyone knows. My people will need a guide who understands both courage and sacrifice. Someone who can see past the differences between our species to what really matters. Jake stared into her dark eyes and saw something that shook him to his core. Behind the child's face, something ancient and knowing looked back at him. Something that had seen the rise and fall of civilizations, the birth and death of stars. Something that understood the true scope of what was coming for the galaxy. And in that moment, Jake Morrison realized that his simple life as an independent trader was over forever. The royal chambers of the Zephyrian Palace stretched before Jake like something from a fever dream. Crystalline walls curved impossibly high, their surfaces alive with flowing patterns of light that responded to the movements and emotions of those within. Floating platforms drifted silently through the vast space, carrying servants and advisors who moved like graceful dancers through their ancient routines. Jake sat in what could generously be called a chair, though its bioadaptive material constantly shifted to accommodate his human physiology in ways that felt distinctly uncomfortable. Across from him, Emperor Volthek paced with predatory restlessness, his four arms gesticulating as he spoke in rapid Zephyrian to a council of advisors who had materialized seemingly from nowhere. Princess Zara perched on a floating cushion nearby, her legs dangling as she absently played with her crystalline device. The holographic images it projected had grown more complex over the past hour, showing intricate battle formations and star charts that meant nothing to Jake but caused visible distress among the assembled alien dignitaries. Empress Nethra stood at a massive viewing window that offered a panoramic view of the capital city below. Millions of Zephyrians went about their daily lives in gleaming spires and floating gardens, unaware that their princess had just identified a human trader as the key to their civilization survival. The Void Syndicate grows bolder, one of the advisors was saying, his translation coming through Jake's earpiece with mechanical precision. 3 more border systems have gone dark in the past month. No these tres signals, no survivors. Just emptiness. Another advisor, this one with skin like polished copper and too many joints in her arms, gestured toward a holographic display. Our scouts report massive fleet movements in the Outer Rim. Ships unlike anything in our databases. They consume entire worlds and leave nothing but dead space behind. Jake felt a chill run down his spine. He'd heard whispers of the Void Syndicate and spacer bars across the galaxy, but most traders dismissed them as ghost stories meant to frighten rookies. According to legend, they were a race of beings that existed between dimensions, feeding on the life force of entire civilizations before moving on to fresh prey. Fairy tales, he muttered, not realizing he'd spoken aloud until every eye in the room turned toward him. Emperor Volthek's expression could have flash-frozen a star. You question the intelligence of my advisors, human? Jake felt sweat bead on his forehead despite the chamber's perfect temperature control. No, your majesty. It's just that where I come from, the Void Syndicate is considered a myth. Something veteran spacers used to scare new pilots into being careful in the outer systems. Princess Zara's soft laughter drew everyone's attention. The sound was musical, but carried an undertone that made Jake's teeth ache. Humans are very good at dismissing things they don't understand. It's one of your species' greatest strengths and most dangerous weaknesses. The crystalline device in her small hands projected a new image that made several advisors step backward in fear. Jake found himself looking at something that defied his understanding of physics and biology. The ships were impossibly large, their dark hulls seeming to bend light around them. They moved through space like living things, their surfaces rippling with patterns that hurt to look at directly. They exist between dimensions, Princess Zara explained, her young voice taking on that eerie quality of ancient knowledge. They feed on the quantum energy that binds matter together. When they consume a world, they don't destroy it in any conventional sense. They simply unweave it from reality. Empress Nethra turned from the window, her living tattoos now glowing with deep crimson patterns. The visions show them arriving within the year. Perhaps sooner. Our fleets will be as insects before them. Then, why not evacuate? Jake asked, genuine confusion in his voice. If you know they're coming and you can't fight them, why not gather as many ships as possible and flee to another galaxy? The silence that followed his question was so profound that Jake could hear the subtle hum of the palace's power systems. Finally, Emperor Volthek spoke, his voice heavy with the weight of impossible responsibility. Because, human, there is nowhere to run. The Void Syndicate doesn't just consume individual worlds or systems. They unravel entire galactic structures. If they succeed here, they will have enough power to spread to every corner of the known universe. We're not just fighting for Zephyria Prime or even the Federation. We are fighting for the continued existence of all sentient life. Jake felt the crushing weight of that responsibility settle on his shoulders like a mountain. And you think I can help with that? I'm one guy with a busted cargo ship. I don't have armies or weapons or any kind of special training. What exactly am I supposed to do against interdimensional world eaters? Princess Zara slid down from her floating cushion and walked over to Jake's bioadaptive chair. Her small hand touched his arm, and he felt a strange tingling sensation as if electricity was flowing between them. When she spoke, her voice carried harmonics that seemed to resonate in his bones. You think in patterns that our people cannot comprehend. Humans are chaos where we are order, innovation where we are tradition, hope where we are resignation. You don't see the impossible as impossible. You see it as a problem to be solved. The holographic display shifted again, showing what looked like a massive space battle. Jake watched ships he didn't recognize fighting desperately against the reality-bending craft of the Void Syndicate. Explosions bloomed silently in the vacuum, and debris scattered like deadly confetti among the stars. In the visions, you don't defeat them through superior firepower, the princess continued. You defeat them by being human, by finding solutions that no Zephyrian mind would ever consider, by turning our greatest weaknesses into unexpected strengths. One of the advisors, a being with crystalline features and movements that reminded Jake of flowing water, stepped forward. The princess speaks of the ancient prophecies. The texts tell of a walker between worlds who would come in the hour of greatest need, one who sees with eyes unclouded by the weight of tradition. Jake looked around the room at the assembled alien dignitaries, each representing a civilization far older and more advanced than humanity. Their technology could reshape matter at the molecular level. Their ships crossed interstellar distances in days rather than months, and their understanding of physics made human science look like finger painting. And yet they were looking to him for salvation. I need to see my ship, Jake said finally. If I'm supposed to help fight interdimensional monsters, I'll need to understand what resources we actually have available. Emperor Volthek nodded slowly. Very well, but understand this, human. If you truly are the one for my daughter's visions, then you carry the fate of the galaxy in your hands. Billions of lives depend on whatever solutions your chaotic human mind can devise. As if summoned by the Emperor's words, the palace's defense systems suddenly came alive. Warning lights bathed the chamber in pulsing red illumination, and a voice spoke in urgent Zephyrian from hidden speakers throughout the room. Princess Zara's crystalline device began chiming frantically, projecting images that shifted too rapidly for Jake to follow. But he caught glimpses of massive ships dropping out of hyperspace, of defensive fleets scrambling to meet an impossible threat, of the first tendrils of darkness reaching towards Zephyria Prime. They're here, the princess whispered, her young face pale with terror and terrible knowledge. The Void Syndicate has found us. The war begins now. Jake Morrison, simple cargo hauler and independent trader, stood in the heart of an alien palace and watched the first shots of a galactic war begin to unfold. In that moment, he realized that everything in his life had been leading to this point. Every decision, every journey, every seemingly random encounter had been preparing him for this impossible responsibility. The fate of the galaxy hung in the balance, and somehow, a broken-down human trader was the key to saving it all. The docking bay erupted into controlled chaos as Jake sprinted toward the lucky strike. Princess Zura's small hand gripped tightly in his own. Behind them, the palace shuddered under the impact of weapons that seemed to tear holes in reality itself. The Void Syndicate had arrived with a fleet that defied comprehension, their ships phasing in and out of normal space like nightmarish ghosts. Jake's cargo ship sat exactly where he'd left it 6 hours ago, but now it looked less like a piece of junk and more like their only hope of survival. The Lucky Strike wasn't much to look at, a battered Corellian-class freighter with mismatched hull plates and engines that wheezed like an old man climbing stairs. But she was fast when she needed to be, and more importantly, she was human-built. "Why are we running to your ship?" Princess Zara asked as they raced across the docking platform. Her small legs couldn't match Jake's pace, so he'd ended up carrying her while she clutched her crystalline device to her chest. "The palace has better defenses than anything your people have built." Jake hit the ship's entry ramp with his fist, grateful when it descended with only a minor grinding noise. Because sometimes the best defense is not being where the enemy expects you to be. And because I've got an idea that's either brilliant or completely insane. The ship's interior was cramped and cluttered with the accumulated debris of a spacer's life. Spare parts hung from magnetic clamps along the walls. Empty coffee containers floated in the low gravity near the recycling unit, and the air carried the familiar sense of metal, ozone, and the synthetic pine air freshener Jake had picked up on Earth. Princess Zara looked around with wide eyes as Jake carried her to the bridge. "This is very different from royal ships." "Yeah, well, royal ships probably don't have what we need right now," Jake said, setting her down in the co-pilot's chair before sliding into his own seat. His fingers flew over the control panels, bringing the Lucky Strike systems online with practiced efficiency. Through the viewport, they could see the battle raging in the space above Zephyria Prime. The Zephyrian fleet, with their elegant ships that looked more like works of art than instruments of war, fought desperately against the reality-bending craft of the Void Syndicate. But it was like watching butterflies try to fight a hurricane. Every time a Void ship took damage, it simply phased out of normal space for a few seconds before returning, fully repaired. "They exist partially outside our dimensional framework," Princess Zara explained, her young voice taking on that unsettling tone of ancient knowledge. "Conventional weapons can damage them, but they retreat to heal in a space between spaces where our physics don't apply." Jake's hands paused over the engine controls as an idea began to form in his mind. It was crazy, probably suicidal, but it was also exactly the kind of chaotic human thinking the princess had said they needed. "What if we followed them there?" he asked quietly. Princess Zara's dark eyes widened. "Into the dimensional void? That's impossible. No organic being could survive in that space. It exists outside the quantum framework that holds matter together. But what if we didn't need to survive it? What if we just needed to exist there long enough to deliver something nasty?" Jake's fingers danced over the navigation computer, pulling up schematics he'd hoped never to use. During his service in the Earth Defense Corps, before he'd become an independent trader, Jake had been part of a classified project involving something called a quantum cascade bomb. The weapon was designed to create a chain reaction in the quantum foam that underlied all reality, essentially causing a localized collapse of space-time itself. The project had been scrapped when scientists realized the weapon was too dangerous to use, capable of destroying entire star systems if the cascade couldn't be controlled. Jake had kept the technical specifications on his personal drive, partly as insurance, and partly because he'd helped design the delivery system. Now, staring at the impossible ships of the Void Syndicate, he realized those abandoned weapons might be the galaxy's only hope. "I need to get a message to my people," Jake said, his fingers flying over the communication controls. "And I need to borrow some of your palace's manufacturing facilities. Can you make that happen?" Princess Zara closed her eyes, and her crystalline device began projecting complex holographic patterns. The air around them filled with mathematical equations and dimensional charts that hurt Jake's head to look at. After a moment, her eyes snapped open. "The visions are changing," she said, excitement creeping into her voice. "I see new possibilities. Your plan, it might actually work. But the cost? What cost? To follow the Void ships into dimensional space, you would need to partially phase your own ship out of reality. The process is not kind to organic matter. You would have perhaps 10 minutes before the quantum dissolution becomes irreversible." Jake felt ice form in his stomach. "And after that, you would exist in all dimensions and none, forever caught between spaces, neither fully real nor fully void." The ship shuddered as another wave of exotic energy washed over the planet from the battle above. Through the communications array, Jake could hear the desperate calls of Zephyrian pilots as they fought and died against an enemy that seemed to mock the very concept of physical laws. How long to manufacture the bombs? Jake asked. Princess Zara consulted her device again. With our fabrication technology, perhaps 3 hours for a single device. But you would need dozens to create a cascade large enough to affect their entire fleet. Then, we better get started. Jake engaged the Lucky Strike's engines, feeling the familiar thrum of power as his ship lifted off from the docking platform. And we need to get word to Earth. If this works, humanity needs to know how to build more of these weapons. If it doesn't, he paused, looking down at the princess who had somehow become his responsibility in the middle of an interdimensional war. If it doesn't work, then at least we'll have tried something no one expected. As they flew toward the palace's manufacturing complex, Jake began composing a message to his sister Maria back on Earth. He told her about the Void Syndicate, about the quantum cascade bombs, about everything he'd learned in the past few hours. He also told her he loved her, and that if she never heard from him again, she should know he'd die trying to save something bigger than himself. Princess Zara reached over and touched his arm as he finished the transmission. You don't have to do this alone, she said quietly. I'm going with you. Absolutely not. You're a child, and this is a suicide mission. I'm the only one who can guide you through dimensional space. My visions show me the paths between realities. Without me, you'll be lost in the void before you can deploy even a single bomb. Jake wanted to argue, but he could see the determination in her dark eyes. This wasn't the stubborn willfulness of a child, but the absolute certainty of someone who had seen the future and knew her place in it. Around them, the battle raged on. The Zephyrian fleet was taking terrible casualties, their beautiful ships reduced to glittering debris that would drift between the stars for centuries to come. But in the cargo hold of a battered human freighter, two unlikely allies worked feverishly to build weapons that might just give the galaxy a fighting chance. The Lucky Strike might not look like much, but she was about to become the most important ship in galactic history. And Jake Morrison, reluctant hero and chaos bringer extraordinaire, was about to prove that sometimes the best way to solve an impossible problem was to break all the rules and see what happened. The quantum cascade bombs took shape in the ship's modified cargo bay, their crystalline cores pulsing with barely contained energy. Each one carried enough destructive potential to crack a moon, and Jake was planning to detonate dozens of them in a space where the normal rules of physics didn't apply. It was insane. It was desperate. It was completely human, and it just might save the galaxy. The Lucky Strike shuddered as it passed through the dimensional barrier, reality twisting around the ship like smoke in a hurricane. Jake's vision blurred as his human brain tried to process the impossible geometry of interdimensional space. Colors that had no names painted the void around them, and mathematical concepts took on physical form before dissolving back into pure thought. Princess Zara sat strapped into the co-pilot's chair, her crystalline device blazing with light as she navigated pathways that existed between the spaces where normal physics held sway. Her small face was pale with concentration, and the silver patterns on her skin pulsed in rhythm with the strange energies surrounding them. 30 seconds until we reach their staging area, she called out, her voice distorted by the dimensional interference. Remember, we have 10 minutes maximum before quantum dissolution becomes irreversible. Jake's hands were steady on the controls despite the impossibility of what they were attempting. The cargo bay behind them held 47 quantum cascade bombs, each one calibrated to trigger a chain reaction in the quantum foam that underlied all reality. If his calculations were correct, the explosion would collapse this entire dimensional pocket, trapping the Void Syndicate fleet in a space-time implosion from which there could be no escape. If his calculations were wrong, they would simply cease to exist across all possible dimensions simultaneously. Through the swirling chaos of interdimensional space, massive shapes began to emerge. The Void Syndicate fleet hung, suspended in the between space like dark tumors in the fabric of reality. Their ships were even more horrifying here in their native dimension, their hulls writhing with patterns that seemed to eat light itself. Jake counted over 200 vessels, ranging from fighters no larger than a ship to massive dreadnoughts that could have swallowed Earth's moonhole. My God, Jake whispered. There are so many of them. This is only a scouting force, Princess Zara replied, her young voice heavy with terrible knowledge. The full fleet numbers in the millions. If we don't stop them here, they'll call for reinforcements that could consume every galaxy in this local cluster. Jake felt sweat beading on his forehead as his human biology struggled against the alien environment. His skin was beginning to feel loose, as if his molecular structure was slowly coming apart. They were running out of time. Beginning deployment sequence, he announced, his fingers dancing over the weapon's controls. The first Cascade bomb ejected from the cargo bay, its crystalline core pulsing with barely contained energy as it drifted toward the Void fleet. The reaction was immediate. Alarms began wailing throughout the enemy ships, though the sounds that emerged were nothing like the electronic warnings of conventional vessels. These were organic screams that seemed to come from the ships themselves, as if the vessels were living creatures that had suddenly sensed mortal danger. They're detecting the quantum signature, Princess Zara said urgently. Deploy faster. They're beginning to phase back to normal space. Jake's hands moved with desperate efficiency, launching bomb after bomb into the interdimensional void. The void ships were beginning to move now, their reality-bending hulls rippling as they prepared to flee back to the safety of normal space-time. But Jake had anticipated this. Each Cascade bomb was equipped with a dimensional anchor, a piece of technology he'd improvised from the Lucky Strike's navigation computer. The anchors would prevent the bombs from being pushed out of interdimensional space, ensuring they would detonate exactly where Jake needed them to. 20 bombs away, Jake called out, feeling his vision starting to blur as quantum dissolution began to affect his nervous system. 25. 30. Around them, the Void fleet was in full panic. Ships that had seemed invincible in normal space now fled like frightened animals, their exotic hulls phasing in and out of visibility as they desperately tried to escape. But Jake's bombs were spreading throughout their formation, each one carried by the strange currents of interdimensional space to optimal positions. 35. 40. That's all of them. Jake slammed his fist down on the detonation control, knowing that he had perhaps seconds before his body dissolved completely into quantum foam. The explosion that followed defied every law of physics that humanity had ever discovered. The Cascade bombs didn't simply explode in the conventional sense. Instead, they created tears in the fabric of space-time itself, holes through which the underlying quantum foam began to collapse. The chain reaction spread through the interdimensional pocket like wildfire, consuming everything it touched. The Void ships, caught in the expanding wave of quantum destruction, simply ceased to exist. Not destroyed, not vaporized, but erased from reality so completely that they had never been. The massive dreadnoughts that had seemed unstoppable moments before folded in on themselves, their exotic matter consumed by the collapsing space-time around them. Jake felt the Lucky Strike being pulled into the expanding cascade, and knew they had run out of time. His body was already becoming translucent as quantum dissolution claimed him, and through the ship's failing sensors he could see that Princess Zara was suffering the same fate. But the young alien princess smiled as her form began to fade. Her crystalline device, glowing brighter than ever, projected one final holographic image. It showed the space above Zephyria Prime, where the remaining Void ships were fleeing in terror as dimensional rifts opened behind them. The interdimensional pocket was collapsing, and the quantum cascade was following the fleeing ships back into normal space. The chain reaction would destroy every Void Syndicate ship in this star system, and the quantum signature would serve as a beacon, calling other members of their species home to investigate. When they arrived, they would find only empty space and the lingering radiation of weapons that could unmake reality itself. Humanity's gift to the galaxy. The knowledge that even interdimensional predators could be hunted. As consciousness faded, Jake felt a strange peace settle over him. He had done something impossible, something that no reasonable person would have attempted. He had looked at an interdimensional threat that had consumed countless civilizations and decided that the solution was to build bigger bombs and follow the monsters home. It was the most human thing imaginable. Princess Zara's hand found his as they both dissolved into quantum possibility. Her final words seemed to echo across multiple dimensions simultaneously, The visions are changing again. This is not the end, Jake Morrison. This is the beginning of something wonderful. The Lucky Strike imploded as the Cascade reached its core, carrying its crew into a space between spaces where they would exist forever as guardians of the dimensional barriers. And in that moment of transition, Jake understood what the princess had seen in her visions. He wasn't meant to save the galaxy once and disappear. He was meant to become something new, something that could stand watch between dimensions and ensure that horrors like the Void Syndicate never again threatened the peace of normal space. Across the galaxy, on 1,000 different worlds, young human children began having dreams of a man in a leather jacket who flew between the stars in a battered cargo ship. They dreamed of bombs that could break reality and of the courage to follow monsters into the dark spaces where they hid. And on Earth, Maria Morrison received a message from her brother that would change the course of human history. Technical specifications for weapons that could police the spaces between dimensions. Coordinates for threats that existed beyond normal space. And, most importantly, the knowledge that humanity's greatest strength wasn't their technology or their military might. It was their absolute refusal to accept that any problem was truly impossible to solve. The Void Syndicate's surviving scouts fled to their home dimension, carrying tales of a species that followed them into interdimensional space with reality-breaking weapons and the kind of insane courage that turns certain defeat into impossible victory. They spoke of humans in hushed tones, adding them to the list of species too dangerous to hunt. And in the space between dimensions, two unlikely guardians began their eternal watch. A human trader who thought outside every possible box, and an alien princess whose visions showed her the infinite possibilities that emerged when chaos met order, and somehow found perfect balance. The galaxy was safe, and the universe had learned a valuable lesson about what happened when you threatened the people that humans cared about. It was, as Princess Zara had predicted, the beginning of something wonderful indeed.